The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
Hey, it's Tony Messia with the Charlotte Ledger, and you're listening to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger by going to thecharlotteledger.com. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast is presented by South Park Community Partners, an independent nonprofit organization whose mission is to lead South Park's advancement by driving economic vitality, creating memorable experiences, and ensuring an extraordinary quality of life. Visit southparkclt.org and follow South Park Community Partners on LinkedIn and on Instagram and Facebook at South Park CLT to learn more about the ways South Park supports the Charlotte region's economy. The host of today's podcast is Steve Dunn. He's a mediator who offers dispute resolution services through the Charlotte office of Miles Mediation and Arbitration. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. I'm Steve Dunn. I'm joined today by Blair Primis, Chief Marketing Officer of Flagship Specialty Partners, a healthcare management services organization for oral surgery practices. Welcome, Blair.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, Blair, one of the things that I do in preparing for these interviews is I look at the guest's LinkedIn profile.
Yes.
And I noticed something about yours, which is that you've got all your boards listed in your LinkedIn profile. You've got all the jobs that you've held, but as well, you've got the boards that you're on, and there's a lot of them. And so clearly community involvement is something that's important to you personally. And I've gotten the impression that it's also something you bring to your professional life. And I'd love to just ask you, what do you see as the value of being involved in the community, both as a person and a professional?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So it's funny, like the LinkedIn example you gave is almost a metaphor for how I kind of think about it maybe more holistically. But it's ironic that in LinkedIn, they have a separate thing for volunteer. If you're on a volunteer board, the expectation of that nonprofit or that volunteer organization is that you will participate as if you're interested in it, which is sort of like ironic that it would be separated. It should be considered a job. And so, like, without getting too ranty just to start the podcast here, like, if you're going to sit on a non-for-profit board, please participate. Like, please be involved. Like, be an active member. Okay.
Well, no, be proud.
Yeah, and be proud. Like, honor it as if it was a job.
Well,
like
that's what the organization wants from you. Right.
Exactly.
That's the whole reason they want you on the board, is so that you can help elevate the message and get it out there. And you're in the communication business, so you understand this perhaps better than some. I'm a lawyer, and so when people want me on boards, they want help with like leases and contracts and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but it's your connections, it's your reputation that you're lending, and the whole point, or I think the theory, is that it's something you believe in, and your belief in it shines a light on the organization itself.
Bingo, exactly right. And so, interestingly enough, I at a moment in my career, I was really fortunate I worked for some ad agencies and moved a little bit here and there. I was really fortunate to get a marketing job at McDonald's, and I worked for McDonald's Corporation for just under 7 years, and maybe the greatest marketing entity that's ever existed when you think about it. 1,000 people in marketing. I mean, maybe one of the most recognizable brands that's out there. But what I really took away from my 7 years there is that it's essentially just a bunch of local businesses all rolled up into one big giant M. And from the most rural places, I was in Raleigh at the time, from the most rural towns and cities in North and South Carolina. Sure, we have big ones in New York and you know Miami and all these places, Chicago, but it's really these small town investments, right? That these franchisees who are local community partners investing in their local businesses, their soccer clubs, their churches, their organizations, their environment, helping teammates, helping people get jobs, like. That's really, I think, the DNA of the organization. And when I was able to get a job here in Charlotte, working for a multi-specialty practice at the time called OrthoCarolina when I was there, we translated that philosophy into healthcare. And the way I synthesize that is by simply saying we thought of healthcare as a product, not a service. And when we did that, it allowed us to say, well, then let's get our product in front of as many people as we possibly can, even when they may not necessarily want it, which is more of a true marketing approach to it. And so I looked back and said, how do we then take this seemingly unneeded service, musculoskeletal care, and invest it in a way that makes it way more relevant in people's lives, even when they don't need our service? And the answer was, go back and invest in your local communities.
All right, let's talk about this.
Yeah,
Because, you have, this is where you and I intersect. All right,
Yeah.
you have an interest in the arts. You're currently a member of the board of Charlotte is Creative, which
Yes.
is one of the most dynamic organizations in Charlotte
Yeah,
today.
it's great.
Putting people together who are doing all kinds of wonderful things. You previously have been on the board of Theater Charlotte, a small theater. All theaters in Charlotte are small.
Yeah, community
So
based, yeah.
I was one of the founders of the nonprofit corporation Carolina Actors Studio Theater.
Amazing.
Cast.
Yeah,
And,
Cast.
I wasn't a founder of the theater itself, but I was a founder of the nonprofit corporation and
Amazing.
helped them form their board. And then I was the board chair for
That's awesome.
a number of years. And so I know what is involved in being a small community theater. And as you're going around trying to generate interest and bring people to your plays and get money and get sponsorships and stuff like that, you kind of learn who's who and what's what, and you see who's sponsoring Blumenthal and the
Right.
Symphony and the 5K, and
Right.
eventually you start to notice that OrthoCarolina is kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
Like OrthoCarolina kind of seemed like one of those ones. I don't know if we ever did anything with OrthoCarolina, but I know that I thought
About
we
it.
could.
Yeah.
Like that
That's it.
they were there and they were interested in people like us. And so I felt this glow about this brand that I'm sure it was what you were trying to create.
Precisely.
It absolutely worked. And what's amazing to me is that so few people and organizations kind of get it. And it's hard to get communication and marketing, I think, in general.
It
Right?
is.
And so I'm very interested in how you brought that. You're dealing with not only healthcare, which doesn't scream out as a consumer-facing industry, right? And you're sponsoring really grassroots level stuff, which is something that a lot of people just don't understand. So
Yeah.
how did you get the idea and how did you execute it?
Yeah, I love that. And I when we play this back, I might steal how you described it in my future conversations. I think that's precisely the impact we were looking to have, right? We wanted somebody to be able to say, like, why don't we give OrthoCarolina a call? They seem interested in lots of things. Why not give them a call? Like, and that was precisely it. And I genuinely believe I can't think of a better way to build a recognizable brand than, regardless of what it is you do, you think about using our company. Right? Like if I'm a cell phone case company and I'm not a cell phone owner, I'm not sure what that cell phone case company would do. Well, maybe one way to do it is to make them convince you to buy a cell phone so they could sell what it is that they're doing. Like, that was the approach we took, which is like, how do we just become part of people's lives as often as humanly possible? It makes our brand relevant every day, all the time, in whatever capacity we can. And I think the real underlying goal there was, how do we make the places and the locations that our providers, doctors, and teammates work at, how do we make Charlotte, the communities, the neighborhoods, the people that live in those places so cool that when folks move here, they never want to leave? And we want other people to decide to do the same thing. And my argument, or my pitch to the providers, to the physicians, was always like, if we can grow our population here, it's good for this is what we need. We can't fix ankles unless there are more ankles here to fix. And so, like, as opposed to just buying our way into, now we did some traditional marketing efforts, of course, but the reality was, let's make Charlotte a place that people want to live and work. And so it made our brand open to any industry: art, science, athletics, community, nonprofits, you name it, I'm interested in it. Because as a city is going to grow or build, you need to have all those avenues open. It's part of my interest in Charlotte is Creative. The irony is, Creative Mornings was one of the very first things that we sponsored, and it wasn't until I left OrthoCarolina that I could join their board, because it was a conflict of interest.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You've got this long-term, big picture view but at the same time, you're working with professionals, right? A lot of doctors at OrthoCarolina and in Flagship, what you're doing now.
Yep.
You're working with doctors. Okay, doctors are professionals.
And surgeons.
I'm a lawyer. Professionals in general are not necessarily the best at marketing, like, in general. But when you're talking about long term and big picture, which I think is perhaps unique, no matter what interest you're in. And so I wonder how that works, right? So, for example, I'm familiar with lawyers. Lawyers get an idea. They think marketing. We need to do more marketing. We got to do something. I'm going to buy one ad one time, and if I don't see clients coming in the door, if I can't draw a line between that expenditure and a client that comes in,
correct.
And in fact, if the business from that client doesn't exceed the cost of the ad, then I'm going to conclude this is irrational and dumb, and I'm not going to do it anymore.
Right.
And I gather from your reaction that you've encountered this attitude before, and I wonder, you have this vision. How do you translate that into a message that professionals can understand and buy into?
Absolutely. And so I think it's, marketing is an investment, not an expense, just like any other investment you might make in your practice. For the oral surgery groups we represent today, right? I mean, how we think about setting up the office itself, like from the furniture to the office, to the equipment we use, to the technology, to the types of implants we buy, to our scrubs, all those things, those are investments in our business. Marketing should be seen as precisely the same. And so if you can get the leadership team and or the physician population to see it as an investment in your business, you now immediately move the pendulum over to, okay, investments are oftentimes seen as a long-term proposition for the company. You buy a piece of real estate, now maybe not in South End or something, maybe you can flip that nowadays, but the reality is, like, you buy a piece of real estate, you sit on it for a while to see how the market grows. You invest in stocks, you whatever you invest in has a plan for long-term growth. And this is how we see marketing. Marketing, as I like to say, is a long arc. It is a bridge that goes out. Now, there are some quick turn things you can do. You can do some, paid ads and quickly see what kind of results you can get from it. I think there's a lot of noise, and, I think cell phones, social media, digital marketing, internet advertising has created a maybe an unfair reality or a kind of like just a missing purpose to what marketing is supposed to be. Marketing is how you think of yourself. Brands are what other people think of you. And oftentimes non-marketers get that backwards. They're like, well, we need a bigger brand. Well, you're not in charge of your brand. I don't mean a logo or a color. I mean, a brand is only what people think it is. The marketing department's job is to understand how we think of ourselves and tell that story. And when magic happens is when the two things meet, is when the brand is thought of the way you think of yourself. Now, I would make the argument you're in business for 100 years. Because you can last a long, long time. And so I think ideally, how can you convince a set of stakeholders to understand that marketing is an investment, and we're going to go to places that allow for our brand to be seen how we think of ourselves? And that's oftentimes how I articulate it to leadership teams and to organizations. And one of the things that's fascinating about what we learned at OrthoCarolina is that we sort of pioneered this approach without giving ourselves too much, being too arrogant about it. Like, I really looked around, and this is 10, 12, 14 years ago. Nobody else was thinking about it this way. And that in and of itself made it exciting. How do we pioneer an approach to say investment in local community? And like you said, having a brand that is almost impossible to ignore, how can that be bad for our business? It just can't be. It just can't be. And so theoretically, how do we take what we've learned, apply it now to our practices? And so just to quickly summarize what I do today, our management services firm represents and partners with 10, 12 oral surgery practices in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And we keep those brands independent. And so how do we take a little bit of this blueprint and then apply it back to these groups and say, well, we will work on direct-to-consumer advertising and making those aware that need their wisdom tooth out or have a jaw problem or have TMJ conditions. Yes, we're a good choice for you. But equally as important is to create those brands and make them recognizable when they do not need our services. And what's been exciting, I'm 8 months into this new role, really starting in January of this year, we've begun to pull some of that blueprint out and make Carolina Centers for Oral Facial Surgery, Virginia Oral Facial Surgeons, Rockcliffe Oral Surgery up in Asheville. We've started to invest locally in our communities specifically for this purpose. How do we create a brand that is recognizable even when we may not be needed by them at the time? That's the key to longevity. That's the arc we want those brands to go on.
Do they get it?
Yeah. I mean, so I'll answer that by saying it's like a 20-60-20. I think 20 of them get it. 60% of them want to get it, and then 20% of them really have no interest in trying to figure it out.
They're probably not doing deals with you unless they're trying to do something new and different, right? So
right.
You got that going for you.
Correct.
You're in the room to have smart conversations about strategy in general, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot more to it, right? There's the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day of the practice operations. There's billing and employment, and there's
HR, IT.
And you get involved. I assume you also consult on layout of the office and scrubs and stuff like that.
We do our
right?
best. We say we think about we partner with a lot of local groups here to say why would we have a more generic photo on the wall or a picture of something? Let's put a living wall and do moss art up there. We work with a local company here in Charlotte, the Savage Way, Tori Savage. Let's create a piece of moss art here. So not only are we now helping a local business, female-owned, female-started local business here in Charlotte, but we're actually leveraging it to actually have a more pleasant patient experience, a little bit of surprise and delight in our office. That's an easy way for us to hit a lot of check marks.
We'll be right back to the conversation. But first, this episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast is presented by South Park Community Partners, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to lead South Park's advancement.
Supporting our local community, helping patient experience, driving relevance of the office, and just that small member, to be frank, right? And nobody wants to be sitting in a surgeon's office. You never want to be there. So what we have to create is an environment where when you do have to come there, you've chosen the right one. You feel good about that. I like to say all the time is we have to be easy to use. I'm jumping around a bit here, and I apologize.
No, that's great. It's fine.
Healthcare is so messed up in the U.S. that we have got to ease of use and convenience has got to be the dominating message to patients, quickly followed by the fact that the quality you're going to receive matches the convenience of the use. And what's nice about my career in healthcare is I've been really fortunate to work with some of the most skilled surgeons. Ironically, Charlotte is known, we have underplayed the skill set of the surgeons we have here, from orthopedics to GI to now oral surgery. We truly, and this is not the marketer sitting here, we have some of the best surgeons in oral surgery right here in Charlotte, Greenville, and this area, Asheville. It's really incredible. And it's been underplayed. So the challenge is we've got the quality. Now let's leverage up the patient experience to be a surprise and delight for them in an environment where you're in pain, healthcare is confusing, insurance is impossible to navigate. Marketing has to solve for all of those elements, not just a pretty ad and not just, a fancy website. We have to do those things too, but we need to have it holistically. And I think if you have a community that embraces what you do for them day in and day out, they're more willing to understand why you're here and what you do and take a chance on you.
So as to the consumer-facing part of this, you had great success with OrthoCarolina, making it a recognizable brand, but that one that most folks, if things are going well, don't need a lot of, right? Hopefully, ideally would be never,
right?
And then rarely is the second best option, right? But you're there for when you're needed. You have said that a big part of what Flagship is trying to do is to make people understand why it's imperative to seek an oral surgeon's care.
Yeah.
And I read that and I thought, wait a minute, I have not been hit in the face with a baseball bat. My tooth doesn't hurt right now. Why is it imperative for me to seek an oral surgeon's care?
Yeah. And so it's again a great question, Steve. A couple of thoughts on that. One is, specifically oral maxillofacial surgeons, what I'd like to ask is, why is an OMS ideal for that? And the answer is often they're dentists and in many cases also doctors. They have done surgical residencies and medical school residencies in addition to dental school and additional training and advanced training on the dental side. And if you have something you care about and really matters in your life, you're going to seek the greatest solution for it. If you have a Ferrari, you would probably most likely take it to a Ferrari dealership to be repaired. No disrespect to some of our local car mechanics. They're all great. Love you all. But the reality is I would take my Honda there, not to bash on Honda, but I will seek the specialty care. That's what we have to figure out. When you have a need for our services and you need to seek it, my goal would be to educate patients enough to understand that seeking out an oral maxillofacial surgeon is critical for your care. They know stuff about craniofacial pain beyond just the mouth and the jaw. They understand the eyes, the nose, the chin. It's essentially like layperson, orthopedics for, basically your face, with the exception of eyes, right? Whole another specialty.
Right.
But I do think that there is some really there's a huge runway available for us to educate patients on why it's important that they see that tertiary caregiver who oftentimes, like we talked about earlier, doesn't know why I need them. The dentist or the orthodontist will identify the challenge or the problem and then pitch them over. Well, the fact of the matter is TMJ is out in the zeitgeist of a thing that's there and is really misunderstood. You should be seeking an OMS for that. You should be seeking a craniofacial, oral maxillofacial surgeon for that care, because they have done the additional training and education to solve the problem once and for all. In some cases non-surgical, in other cases surgical. And so there's the idea behind it. And so I think that's the runway we want to take when it comes to talking about Flagship's approach to supporting our practices, right? We're a managed service company. There's a Blair for all of our other services, accounting, HR, finance, IT, revenue cycle, and they have the same approach we do. How can we do it better, more different? How can we differentiate, do it better, more efficiently, and at the end of the day, have high level of outcomes, outstanding clinical care, and make physicians' lives and our company's lives successful? And if we can do all of those things, I think we've hit grand slams.
You've been in Charlotte for 17 years.
Yes.
You are deeply invested in the project of making Charlotte cool and making Charlotte seem cool. Not only making it a great place to live, but getting the word out that Charlotte is a great place to live. So where are you from? What do you think about Charlotte, and why is it a great place to live?
Yeah, it's great. So I grew up in New Jersey. I went to high school.
You went to Duke.
Yes, went to Duke. So of course I'm from New Jersey.
Of course you're from New Jersey.
Exactly.
What exit?
Yeah, exactly. 114.
All right, fantastic.
Yeah.
Little inside Duke humor there for the listeners. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. So my freshman class at Duke, I think I have this stat correct, I think half of my class was from New York, New Jersey, or Connecticut. And the other half was from everywhere else.
Well, there are a bunch from North Carolina, too. I can tell you that.
Yeah, good. And so I went to high school, grew up in New Jersey, loved it, and was fortunate enough to get into Duke, came down to North Carolina, spent some time here, spent a small period of time back in New York City working in an ad agency, got married, and moved back down here. And been in North Carolina. I lived in Carrboro, Chapel Hill, and Durham since 1998. So I'm really now from North Carolina. I'm just born in New Jersey. And 10 years, 9.5 or 10 years on the east side of the state, and now over here in the Charlotte market. What's funny about why I like Charlotte, at the time I was living in Raleigh and commuting into Charlotte often for meetings. And I would run into all of the things like 485 and 77 and things and be like, oh God, the traffic is so terrible getting here. Like, I'm not sure I ever want to come live here when I lived in Raleigh. Well, got a job here, moved here, and now all of my kids have been raised here. I've lived in 3 or 4 different communities, South Charlotte to Uptown. I now live in the Dilworth area, and I just find its growth, I find its vibrancy, I find its willingness to try new things super exciting. Lot still to do here, and I think tons of opportunity. I do think there's an opportunity for us to carve out even a bit more maybe of our own identity versus comparing ourselves to anybody else. Let's be uniquely us, or let's be unique as we, as a community, as opposed to maybe following in somebody else's footsteps.
It's interesting, the observation that you make there.
Yeah.
About Charlotte's willingness to try new things. It is an interesting thing about this town. When I moved here after law school, I'm from Charlotte. I went to high school in Charlotte, but I came back here after law school, and somebody asked me, one of my friends asked me, like, what's the difference between Charlotte and Chapel Hill? He was trying to figure out and I never really thought about why is a city different from another city. And basically what I came up for him was, in Chapel Hill, there's all this tradition and history that's there. That's a thing that you sort of slot into, and your identity relates to the identity that exists in this place.
Totally.
Whereas in Charlotte, it's much more of a blank slate, or kind of an open playing field. Like there's a lot of people that are like basically just trying to make money, and they're kind of doing their own thing, and as a consequence of that, I think a lot of people have sort of a negative view of that. They feel like that Charlotte doesn't have an overriding identity, but I see that as kind of empowering and very open-minded in a way. Like there's room for everybody here to do their thing, and nobody's really bothering each other in their endeavors, like whatever it is.
So yeah, we're like-minded on that. I consider myself a creative, and I oftentimes find it's hard sometimes for creatives to communicate that they sometimes don't like rigidity and structure and a definition of a thing. My definition of being a creative is I don't actually have a full-time identity in something. I can do multiple things. I weave in and out of stuff. Whereas I think there's oftentimes thought of maybe as, the moniker we have, right? A banking city or an energy city of that, because Duke's here. At the end of the day, I think Duke Energy, that is. I think that, sure, there's some rigidity and maybe benefit we have. Look at all the things that Hugh McCall and Bank of America and they provided great resources for the Levines, all that stuff. It's fantastic. But at the end of the day, I think really our future growth is the fact that it is gray. It can still be defined. Do we have growing pains and struggles that people like to point out? Sure. But honestly, if we lived in Nashville or Austin or Columbus or some of the places we get compared to, and we lived there long enough, I'm sure we'd have the same thoughts. The reality is if you pull back on the stick, you can see so much up in the air and be like, look what's going on at Camp North End. Look how South End is developing. Look at the new neighborhoods that are popping up. And look at the things that are going on. We're trying this social district and plaza. I love that we're trying all these things. Let's go after these and give them a run to see how they pan out. And the fact that we're here for the trial and error component of it, to me, is what's exciting about it. Is everybody frustrated by the airport's, construction? Of course we are. Yes. But imagine if we were in a city where we didn't need the construction.
Right.
This would be a whole different vibe.
Yeah. Good problems to have.
Yes.
I live in Plaza Midwood, and we're always complaining about there's no place to park. And I'm always telling people, that's the problem we want, right?
Right.
We don't want the problem to be that nobody's coming. We don't want the problem of boarded up storefronts, right? We want the problem of no place to park. That's what
Yes. And it forces you to think differently about the community you're a part of. It forces you to think differently about how you get from place to place. And I would argue it makes you think differently about where you invest your time and your energy. Let's go spend time at a place where I know I can get to, or that I feel like I have an opportunity to talk to folks at, or I'm interested in trying something new. I am thrilled to be here in Charlotte, and I consider it lucky. Like I said, my friends and family and kids have all grown up here, been raised here, and it makes it exciting when I can visit and go to other places. But like so many other, right? I almost consistently come back from a weekend and lay down in bed and be like, oh man, it's so nice to be back home.
Good to be back.
Good to be back.
No place like home, right?
Good to be back.
Well, here you are. You've been in Charlotte for 17 years. You've been a professional for longer than that.
Yeah.
You've been honored by the Charlotte Ledger as being someone who's over 40 years old.
Yes.
And I often think about the people who shaped us and the way that we have an opportunity to shape others. And I wonder if you were particularly inspired in your career by anyone who you consider a mentor. And I wonder if you've had the experience of working with folks who are following in your footsteps, and how you feel about that and what you try to impart upon those folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I actually try to work pretty hard. I spend a lot of time with skill pop classes, and I do a lot of teaching and mentoring, and I'm actively trying to uplift and support those that either I have worked with and or that are colleagues of mine. And I actually kind of see it a little bit as my responsibility, quite frankly. I feel like, to work with folks and teammates, and, sometimes a career is so transient, right? You work with somebody for 2 years, and, then months go by before you talk to them, or in some cases years go by before you talk to them. And the time you're together, you saw them every day, all the time, for hours upon hours. Now, maybe not so much, post-COVID, right, where we see them on boxes on screens. But I do think, you think about that water cooler conversation, or I have a really good friend of mine from OrthoCarolina who he and I stay in touch all the time now. We have not worked directly together for several years, but we talk, frequently, and we talk about the days where we could walk into one another's offices and chat. And I am here for him. He is here for me. And we support one another's careers in that way. And we do it with honesty and integrity, and we grow together. And I try to impart that on the folks that I have worked with. 2 women that were on my team at OrthoCarolina, I literally just drove out to watch them teach a marketing class. I posted on it on LinkedIn and said, this is like a fun moment for me to look back and see, wow, these were 2 teammates I hired that I worked with years ago who are now taking the step in their career to go do this work. Simon Sinek, I'm a big fan of his podcasts, his books. I like the way he thinks about the world. I mimic a lot of what he does. I think my advertising chops and some of the things I've done in my career as an advertising guy informed a lot. I had some wonderful mentors and marketers at McDonald's, which was just terrific. And I think those were sort of the formative years. I got really lucky, actually. My very first job out of college, my boss, Tom Telesco, if you're out there, Tom, he was spectacular. And he, talked about marketing so creatively that it allowed you to say there really is nothing we can't accomplish as an agency, or that we can think of anything and solve it in any way. And for my formative years in the mid-90s up to where I am today, I try to carry all that through. I'm sort of an amalgam of all the people that came before me, and I try to project that onto the team we have today.
Well, Blair, Primis, it's a pleasure speaking with you today.
Steve,
thank you for what you're doing for the city of Charlotte, and thank you for taking time to be a part of the Charlotte Ledger podcast.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Really spectacular conversation today.
That's it for today. The Charlotte Ledger podcast is produced by Lindsay Banks. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger at thecharlotteledger.com. And you can find out more about our 40 over 40 awards at ledger40over40.com. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast was presented by South Park Community Partners, a nonprofit who leads South Park's advancement by driving economic vitality, creating memorable experiences, and ensuring an extraordinary quality of life.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.